For a long time, Elon Musk was easy to understand. A billionaire engineer, a risk taker, a man trying to push humanity forward when institutions moved too slowly. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Not suddenly, not loudly, quietly. Today, when Elon Musk speaks, governments react, markets move, media narratives bend, and millions of people listen, not because they were told to, but because they choose to. This is not the story of a villain, and it is not the story of a hero. It is the story of influence, how it forms, how it grows, and how it begins to matter in places we never expected. To understand Elon Musk's influence, we have to go back before the headlines, before the tweets, before the culture wars. Elon Musk built his reputation on solving problems others avoided: online payments when banks hesitated, electric vehicles when oil ruled, reusable rockets when space was considered untouchable. Governments didn't just tolerate him, they relied on him. NASA depended on SpaceX. The U.S. military used Starlink. Federal agencies approved contracts worth billions. At this stage, Musk was seen as a partner of the system, a disruptor, yes, but a useful one, someone who challenged bureaucracy while still operating within it. But power has a way of expanding when it's not carefully defined. As Musk's companies grew, so did his audience. Not customers, followers. Millions of people didn't just buy his products, they adopted his worldview, they trusted his instincts, they believed his warnings. And slowly, business influence turned into cultural influence. Then came the platform. When Elon Musk took control of Twitter, later renamed X, he didn't just buy a company, he acquired a global conversation engine. A place where journalists break news, politicians test messages, activists mobilize, and narratives are born, reshaped, or buried within hours. Musk said it was about free speech, about restoring balance, about breaking old media monopolies. Some people felt relieved, others felt uneasy, because control over speech isn't only about what is allowed, it's about what is amplified, what is deprioritized, what feels normal, and what slowly fades into the background. As Musk began posting more frequently, his opinions stopped feeling casual. They started landing inside political debates: immigration, pandemics, wars, elections, not as policy papers, as reactions, as questions, as jokes that carried weight. Supporters saw honesty, a man saying what others were afraid to say, someone unfiltered, human, resistant to elite pressure. Critics saw something else, a private citizen with unprecedented reach, a business leader whose platforms and contracts intersected with governments while publicly challenging them. The tension didn't explode, it accumulated, because the world is no longer divided simply between media and politics. Platforms are politics now, visibility is power now, and influence doesn't need a title anymore. So the question quietly forming beneath the noise isn't about Elon Musk himself, it's about what happens when one person can shape technology, communication, and public opinion at the same time. No laws were broken, no offices were seized, no coups were staged, just influence, expanding, normalizing, becoming part of everyday life. And once influence reaches that point, it no longer asks for permission, it simply exists. And whether that makes the future safer or more fragile is a question we're only beginning to face. Influence doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It settles in quietly, through habit, through repetition, through trust. By the time people began debating Elon Musk's power, it was already established. The background matters here, because Musk didn't rise through politics or media, he rose through results. Cars on the road, rockets in orbit, satellites lighting up war zones and disaster areas when governments couldn't act fast enough. This is why his voice carried credibility, not borrowed authority, earned authority. When Tesla reshaped the auto industry, it forced governments to rewrite energy policy. When SpaceX lowered launch costs, it changed national space strategies. When Starlink provided internet to Ukraine, it altered the realities of modern warfare. None of this came from speeches or campaigns. It came from infrastructure, and infrastructure is power that doesn't need elections. As Musk's companies embedded themselves deeper into daily life, the line between private innovation and public dependency began to blur. Governments needed him, consumers trusted him, media followed him. At the same time, traditional institutions were losing credibility. Legacy media struggled with trust, politicians struggled with approval, experts struggled to persuade a skeptical public. Into that vacuum stepped figures who felt authentic, unpolished, direct. Elon Musk didn't speak like a politician. He didn't move like a media executive. He spoke in fragments, memes, late-night thoughts, and that made people feel closer to him. But closeness is not neutrality. As social platforms evolved, attention became currency, and Musk understood attention better than most. Every post created reaction, every reaction fueled relevance, every moment of relevance reinforced influence. What changed wasn't just what Musk said, it was how quickly his words spread. A single comment could dominate news cycles, a single reply could reshape a debate, not because it was official, but because millions were watching. This is where tension began to rise, because when influence grows faster than accountability, discomfort follows. Journalists started asking different questions, not "is he right?" but "why does this matter so much?" Governments quietly adjusted strategies. Companies watched markets swing after his posts. Public figures responded to him directly, knowing silence could feel like defeat. Yet Musk never claimed leadership. He never asked for votes. He never framed himself as a ruler. That ambiguity made everything harder. Supporters argued he was just exercising free speech. Critics argued his reach made that comparison incomplete. Both sides were partly right, because influence today doesn't look like authority used to. It looks informal, casual, decentralized, and that's what makes it powerful. By this point, Elon Musk wasn't just a businessman commenting on the world. He was a node where business, media, and politics overlapped, not intentionally, not ceremonially, structurally. And once power becomes structural, it doesn't disappear when the conversation moves on. It stays in place, quietly shaping what comes next. The tension didn't explode. It accumulated. Slowly, almost invisibly, Musk's influence began to touch areas where neutrality mattered: algorithms, information flow, political timing. When he acquired a major social media platform, the debate shifted overnight. This was no longer just about cars or rockets. This was about who controls the digital town square. Supporters saw restoration, fewer filters, fewer gatekeepers, more raw speech. Critics saw risk, instability, amplification, unpredictability. What made the moment heavier wasn't policy, it was perception. Every platform decision was interpreted as ideology. Every change was framed as intent. Silence became a statement. Action became evidence, and Musk stood in the center of it, not explaining, not retreating, not fully engaging either. Markets reacted, headlines multiplied, politicians referenced him without naming him. Behind the scenes, governments quietly evaluated dependence. Satellite networks, electric vehicle supply chains, space contracts. The realization was unsettling. Too many critical systems now traced back to one ecosystem, not one country, one person's companies. That didn't mean control, but it meant leverage, and leverage, even unused, changes behavior. Media coverage intensified, not because Musk demanded attention, but because ignoring him became impossible. When he commented on elections, even casually, it rippled. When he questioned institutions, trust wavered. When he joked, markets moved. This wasn't manipulation, it was gravity. The larger the object, the stronger the pull. And yet, Musk didn't adjust his tone to match the weight. He remained informal, unscripted, sometimes careless. That contrast created friction because power delivered casually feels different than power delivered carefully. Some saw honesty, others saw irresponsibility. The tension grew not from what Musk did, but from uncertainty about what he might do next. There was no playbook, no precedent. Traditional power had checks, votes, boards, institutions. This kind of influence lived in real time, across screens, across borders, across emotions. And for the first time, societies had to confront a new question. What happens when technological capability outpaces political structure? No one had a clear answer, only a growing sense that the balance had shifted and it wasn't shifting back easily. Reactions split sharply but not cleanly. They fractured along unfamiliar lines. Some politicians praised Musk as a symbol of innovation and independence, a builder who refused to bow to bureaucracy, a reminder that progress doesn't always ask permission. Others warned that admiration was blinding people to risk, that influence without accountability isn't freedom, it's fragility. In the media, the divide was just as visible. One headline framed him as a visionary reshaping the future. The next framed him as a destabilizing force with too much reach. Both stories used the same facts. They arrived at opposite conclusions. Supporters pointed to outcomes: cleaner energy, global internet access, private industry achieving what governments struggled to deliver. They argued, but fear of power often targets those who move faster than institutions can respond, that innovation always unsettles before it stabilizes. Critics focused on process. Who decides the rules? Who enforces them? What happens when personal belief intersects with global infrastructure? They weren't accusing intent, they were questioning structure. Online, the conversation intensified. Every Musk post triggered instant alignment or opposition, not discussion, positioning. People weren't debating ideas anymore, they were choosing sides. And that shift mattered, because when influence becomes identity-based, nuance disappears. Every action becomes symbolic, every silence becomes strategic. Even within tech communities, consensus collapsed. Some engineers defended autonomy and speed, others argued for guardrails before scale. Investors were no less divided. Volatility thrilled some, uncertainty unsettled others. And quietly, regulators watched, not rushing, not reacting publicly, but taking notes. Because history shows that when reactions polarize this deeply, the issue isn't the individual, it's the system struggling to adapt. Musk became the focal point not because he asked to be, but because modern power no longer fits old categories. He wasn't elected, he wasn't appointed, he wasn't inherited. Yet his decisions echoed through markets, media, and politics alike. That contradiction left people uneasy, not angry, uneasy. And unease is more powerful than outrage, because it doesn't burn out quickly. It lingers. And beneath all of this noise, there was something missing: clarity. For all the debate, for all the analysis, some of the most important questions remained unanswered, not because no one asked them, but because no one could answer them with certainty. what does accountability look like when influence is global but authority is national? Who steps in when decisions cross borders faster than laws can follow? And perhaps most uncomfortable of all, what happens when a single individual sits at the intersection of technology, communication, and capital? There was no precedent that fully applied. Governments were built to regulate industries, not personalities. Laws were written for corporations, not for individuals whose reach rivals institutions. Even traditional checks and balances struggled to find their footing. Courts moved slowly, legislation moved slower, technology moved at the speed of code, and in that gap, uncertainty grew. Supporters argued that uncertainty is the price of progress, that history rewards risk-takers, not regulators. They pointed to moments where innovation outpaced fear and reshaped the world for the better. But critics didn't see fear, they saw exposure. They asked what safeguards exist when platforms influence elections indirectly, when algorithms shape attention, when infrastructure choices affect geopolitical balance. Not accusations, but hypotheticals that carried real weight. Even Musk himself rarely offered the kind of answers people expected, not because he avoided the questions, but because his responses often reframed them. He spoke about first principles, about long-term survival, about the dangers of stagnation. To some, that felt visionary, to others, evasive. And the more he spoke in broad ideas, the more specific the public's concerns became. Meanwhile, institutions hesitated. No agency wanted to be first, no government wanted to overreach, no regulator wanted to trigger unintended consequences. So the questions stayed open, floating, unresolved. And unresolved questions don't fade away, they compound. They turn into pressure, into speculation, into narratives filled by those with the loudest voices, not the clearest evidence. This was the quiet tension beneath the surface, not a scandal, not a confrontation, but a growing sense that the world had entered a phase it wasn't prepared for, where power was decentralized, but influence wasn't, where innovation solved problems while creating new ones, where trust depended not just on outcomes, but on transparency, and transparency was still catching up. As the conversation continued, one thing became clear. This wasn't about liking or disliking Elon Musk. It was about understanding what comes next when traditional boundaries no longer apply, and whether society could adapt before the questions demanded answers on their own. In the end, the story did not resolve itself with a verdict, a headline, or a final statement. It settled into something quieter, a pause. Because influence, when it reaches this scale, doesn't collapse overnight. It fades, shifts, or transforms, sometimes without anyone noticing until the world looks different than it did before. Elon Musk remained where he had always been, at the center of innovation, at the edge of controversy, and in the middle of a conversation that refused to end. Supporters continued to see momentum, a future pushed forward by ambition and a refusal to accept limits. They spoke of outcomes, not optics, of results, not reactions. Critics, meanwhile, remained cautious, not angry, not alarmist, just unconvinced that the existing systems were enough to manage what had been created. And both sides, whether they admitted it or not, shared the same uncertainty. What happens when influence outgrows the structures designed to contain it? There was no dramatic conclusion, because reality rarely provides one. No single moment where everything becomes clear, no final chapter where every question is answered. Instead, there was continuity. Decisions would keep being made, platforms would keep evolving, technologies would keep advancing, and the public would keep watching, not with outrage, but with attention, because attention in this era is the true currency of accountability. The conversation around power, technology, and responsibility would not end here. It would resurface in elections, in policy debates, in moments of crisis and innovation alike, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, but always present. And perhaps that is the real conclusion, not a judgment of one individual, but a recognition of a new reality, where influence is no longer rare, where impact is no longer localized, and where responsibility must evolve alongside capability. The future will not ask whether this influence existed. That question has already been answered. It will ask whether society learned to live with it, carefully, thoughtfully, and with eyes open. And that question, for now, remains unanswered.